Welcome to The Explainer. So, you want to be a great investor, right? I mean, who doesn't? You're probably doing all the usual stuff, studying balance sheets, watching the market like a hawk. But what if I told you the real secret to picking amazing stocks has almost nothing to do with stocks? Yeah, it sounds crazy, but that's the core idea from the legendary investor Charlie Munger. He believed that before you can even think about mastering money, you first have to master a way of thinking, a framework he called worldly wisdom. And Munger gets right to the heart of the matter with this classic quote. You've probably heard it before, right? To the man with only a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. It's such a brilliant way to describe a huge flaw in how we think. See, when you only have one tool, you don't just see nails everywhere, you actually start turning everything into a nail. You take these messy, complicated problems and just smash them into a simple box that fits your one tool. And that, my friends, leads to some truly disastrous decisions. Not just in investing, but in life. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to walk through Munger's logic step by step. We'll start with his big idea, worldly wisdom. Then we'll get practical and talk about building your mental toolkit. After that, we dive into the psychology of why our brains trick us, see how this all applies to business, and finally bring it all home to his actual investment method. Okay, first up, the need for worldly wisdom. You might be asking, wait, why can't I just study investing to be good at investing? It seems logical, right? But for Munger, that's a huge trap. His core belief is that super deep specialization without a broad foundation is actually dangerous. To really, truly excel in any one field, you've got to start with a broad understanding of how the whole world works. And this is where it gets really good. The key insight here is that knowledge isn't just about memorizing a bunch of facts. I mean, anyone can do that. It's all about how those facts connect to each other. Without some kind of mental framework, he calls it a latticework of theory. All those facts you know are just, well, they're like a pile of bricks without any mortar. They're useless. You can't build anything, you can't solve new problems. It's just a big, dumb pile of information. So this is Munger's answer. Worldly wisdom sounds kind of grand and maybe a little vague, right? But it's not some mystical thing. It's actually a super practical toolkit. A toolkit filled with mental models that you borrow from all sorts of different fields. The idea is to look at a single problem from a bunch of different angles. You look at it like a mathematician, then like a biologist, and then like a psychologist, all at the same time. All right, section 2, building your mental latticework. Now, I know what you're thinking. Build a latticework of models from all of science? That sounds impossible. But Munger's a very practical guy. He says you don't need to be an expert in everything. You don't need to know it all. He figures you just need about 80 to 90 of the really big, important ideas from the major fields, and those will do like 90% of the work for you. It's all about leverage. And he gives us a roadmap. He says, look, start with the hard sciences, physics, math, engineering. Why? Because those models are the most reliable and time-tested. Things like, basic probability, like permutations and combinations from math. Or the idea of having backup systems and thinking about breakpoints straight out of engineering. Once you've got those down, you can move into the messier, more complex systems like biology, where you learn about ecosystems. And of course, the big one, psychology, where you learn about all the crazy biases that mess with our thinking. Now, here's a really subtle but crucial point. This is what separates the amateurs from the pros. Just knowing a model isn't enough. You can't just blindly trust it. Take accounting, for example. We call it the language of business, and it is. But it's just a language. It's a rough approximation of what's really happening. It's not reality itself. A truly wise person knows not just what their tools are good for, but they are obsessed with understanding the limitations of those tools. And here's a perfect real-world example of one of these simple, powerful models. Munger talks about this engineer, Carl Braun, who had this one simple rule for his company. Every single communication, every order, had to answer the 5 W's, especially the last one, why. He figured, correctly, that if people know why they're doing something, they don't just blindly follow orders. They get it, they engage their brains, they do a better job, and sometimes they even find a smarter way to get it done. It's a simple little rule, but it's grounded in some really deep psychology about human motivation. Okay, section 3. If you remember one thing from this whole explainer, make it this. Munger says that of all the fields you can learn from, one is far more important than all the others put together, and that's the psychology of human misjudgment. The reason is simple. The single most dangerous and unreliable tool you will ever use is your own brain. It is not a perfect computer. It's a buggy piece of software, full of shortcuts and glitches that can and will lead you to make terrible mistakes. And Munger just loves this quote from Pascal. It really gets at the heart of the problem, this paradox of being human. Think about it. Our minds can compose incredible music, write beautiful poetry, even send people to the moon. We are brilliant. But at the same time, that same brilliant mind has these standard, predictable, factory-installed bugs that cause us to make the same dumb mistakes over and over again. So, if our brains are so flawed, what do? How do we fight back? Well, Munger has a method. He calls it a two-track analysis. It's pretty straightforward, really. Track 1, you analyze the situation rationally. You do the numbers. You might say, okay, based on the financials, this stock is super cheap. Simple enough. But then comes track 2, and this is the important part. You have to turn the analysis on yourself. You have to ask, okay, why do I really want to buy this? Is it just because everyone else is jumping on the bandwagon? That's a psychological bias called social proof. Am I holding on to this other stock that's a total dog because I can't admit I was wrong? That's loss aversion. See? You analyze the problem out there, and then you analyze the glitches in here. Okay, so let's take all these ideas and see how they actually work in the real world. Let's talk about business. This is where Munger's approach gets really powerful. He says if you combine models from, say, biology and psychology, you stop seeing business as just numbers on a spreadsheet. Instead, you start to see it for what it really is, a complex, living, breathing ecosystem. And in any ecosystem, there are powerful forces at play. One of the biggest in business is what Munger calls the advantages of scale. This is basically a giant feedback loop. When a company gets big, it can produce things cheaper. Because it's big, people trust its brand more. Because everyone uses it, new customers feel safe using it too. That's social proof again. It gets better deals from suppliers, it can afford to hire the best specialists. All these advantages feed on each other, creating this massive competitive moat that makes it incredibly hard for a little guy to compete. But, and there's always a but, scale has a huge, dark underbelly. It has a constant curse. As companies get bigger and bigger, they almost inevitably become these slow, bloated, big, dumb bureaucracies. The focus shifts, right? It's less about serving the customer and more about internal politics, about just pushing paper around and justifying your own department's existence. And not rot, that slowness creates the perfect opening for a smaller, faster, hungrier competitor to come in and eat their lunch. And the classic example of this is Sears versus Walmart. I mean, think about it. Sears was the Amazon of its day. It was the undisputed king with every single advantage of scale you can imagine. But what happened? It got fat and happy. It became a giant bureaucracy. And along comes Sam Walton. He wasn't necessarily an inventor, but he was a fanatic. He copied every smart thing his competitors were doing, did it with way more intensity, and just ran circles around the slow-moving giant that Sears had become. And that brings us to section 5, the grand finale. This is the payoff. We've built this whole foundation of worldly wisdom, of psychology, of looking at business like an ecosystem. So how does this all translate into actually making money in the stock market? Let's finally dig into the Munger method. The first thing you need to know about Munger's method is that it starts with a big dose of humility. You have to accept the fact that the stock market is, for the most part, pretty darn efficient. This is not a game where you can just show up and expect to win easily. The competition is fierce and the market is smart. Munger loves the analogy of a pari-mutuel system, like you'd find at a horse race. Imagine you go to the track and there's one horse that is clearly the fastest. It's going to win. The problem is, everybody knows it's the fastest horse. So many people bet on it that the odds become terrible. You might win the bet, but you'll barely make any money. The stock market is exactly the same. Sure, Coca-Cola is a fantastic company. Everyone knows it. And because of that, its stock price already reflects that greatness. There's no easy money, no obvious edge to be found. So what's the secret? How do you win? It's simple, but it's not easy. You don't win by playing all the time. You don't bet on every race. The wise investor, Munger says, does the hard, boring work of studying and waiting, and waiting, and waiting. And then, when the world finally offers up one of those rare, beautiful, mispriced opportunities where the odds are just ridiculously stacked in your favor, you don't just nibble, you bet big. You load up the truck. Warren Buffett has this great mental model to force this kind of thinking. He says to imagine you get a punch card at birth, and it only has 20 slots on it. That's it. You only get to make 20 investments in your entire life. Think about how that would change your behavior. You wouldn't be making silly little bets on a whim, would you? No way. You'd do incredible amounts of research. You'd wait patiently for an absolute no-brainer, and then you'd make a huge, concentrated bet. It's a mental trick, but it forces the kind of discipline that produces incredible results. And here's the last and maybe the most important piece of the Munger puzzle. It's this idea of a circle of competence. You have to be brutally, painfully honest with yourself about what you know and what you don't know. There's a reason Munger and Buffett historically stayed away from tech stocks for so long. It wasn't because they thought tech was bad, it was because they admitted it was outside their circle of competence. Munger's point is that it's infinitely better to be the world's expert on something simple that you understand than it is to be a novice playing a game where everyone else has a massive edge over you. And really, that's what this all comes down to. This whole philosophy of worldly wisdom, it isn't a checklist or a bunch of hot stock tips. It's a blueprint for how to think better. The goal here isn't to go out and try to be Charlie Munger. The goal is to build your own latticework of mental models, to understand your own psychological biases, and to be incredibly honest about the edges of your own knowledge. Which leaves us with the one question that really matters, the one you have to answer for yourself. What's in your circle of competence?